Hi students, welcome you to the joint venture chapter video. In this video I am going to explain the remaining journal entries for ascertaining a profit or loss of a joint venture. So first three entries are for when co-venturer brings or co-venturers brings capital to the joint venture. Then for recording expenses also we have what uh, discussed some entries. I have explained some two entries for recording what expenses as and when a particular expense is incurred. So you need to write these entry. If such expenses are incurred many times, then you have to write the same entry many times. So in the same way, next is income means as we know that we are going to ascertain the profit or loss of these joint venture means profit or loss is a result of what expenses and incomes which are incurred in the joint venture. So as we recorded the expenses, in the same way we should also record what incomes, which is income to the joint venture means contract price. As we know that joint venture may be for construction of building or construction of road. So on for constructing that particular road or building or for underwriting shares, they will agree a contract price which will they receive as income. So that's why when contract price is received by the joint venture, then two accounts will be raised in this transaction. That is, one is contract price, other is joint bank. So contract price is what income. So as we know that, as I explained in the earlier video also, as and when we receive an income, instead of that income we should open what joint venture account. In the expense also we did the same thing, means if expense is debited, as we know that as per nominal account expenses are to be debited, instead of debiting that expense we have to debit what joint venture, means that particular expense should be transferred to a joint venture account. In the same way, if you receive income, income is what should be credited as per nominal account, but income should not be written directly. Instead of income we should write what joint venture account. So that's why it is nominal account, we should credit it. So as and when that amount is received, so as we know that amount of joint venture will be maintained through joint bank or joint bank ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ದುಡ್ಡನ್ನು maintain ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ. So which is opened at the uh, beginning of the joint venture or at the time of commencing that joint venture. So joint bank receives what amount, as it is real account, so it receives money. So that is nothing but the joint venture receives money, so that's why we debit it. So the concluded entry for this is what bank account data to joint venture account. In the same way, the same contract price may be received by any co-venturer, means in the expense also we did the same, we discussed the same thing, that is expense may be incurred by joint venture directly, or some expenses may be incurred by co-venturer. In the same way, income may also be received by the joint venture directly, that through joint bank account, which we already discussed in the fourth entry. So in the same way, co-venturer may also what receive the contract price. So here also we have two accounts, the same income, that is contract price here, which is written as CP. So next, instead of bank account, we'll write what co-venturer account, means bank will not receive amount here, co-venturer is receiving. So it is personal account. So instead of income, we have what open joint venture account. So it is nominal account, it should be credited. Instead of crediting income, we will credit what joint venture. Next, another account which is arised here is co-venturer. So it is personal account. He receives amount, means he receives contract price, that is nothing but he receives amount of this joint venture, that is considered as receiver anta consider ಮಾಡಿ we have to debit him. So concluded entry for the entry of what when the contract price is received by co-venturer, then this is the entry co-venturer account data to joint venture account. So next, these entry under means the expenses and income entries are the regular expenses and incomes are what contract price and other material purchased. Next, remaining entries are arised at the time of what liquidation of joint venture. What is this liquidation of joint venture? As we know that the joint venture will be in existence only up to the completion of that particular task, means construction of building idre a construction of building varge matra andre completion agovarge matra that will be in existence. As and when that building construction is completed, then that should be what? Liquidated. That will be no more in existence. So ಅವಾಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು? ಲಿಕ್ವಿಡೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? There may be some surplus materials. ಅಂದರೆ for constructing building they will have what purchased some materials, but that materials surplus ಏನಾದರೂ ಉಳ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರೆ, if there any materials are left unused after the completion of that particular task, then they should what? Sell such materials or any assets left. So then if it is sold, then these arise as two accounts, that is material sold. But material sold is what? Income. So income is what? Instead of income, whenever we have income in the joint venture account or expense in the joint venture account, we open a separate account called what? Joint venture, that instead of that particular income or expense. So same thing I have done here. So as it is income, so that joint venture account should be credited for what? Material sold. And one more account is that what? Joint bank. Means the amount of material sold is received what? By bank. That through ಅಥವಾ ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ? ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ರಿಯಲ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ as it is debited as money is received by the joint venture. So this is entry, joint bank account data to joint venture account. The same entry which we write for recording income will write here also. Even materials are sold, what? Surplus materials. Next, instead of selling that surplus material to somebody else, so if co-venturer takes over that material, and if that materials are taken over by co-venturer, so whoever may take over that, but it is income. So as there are surplus materials, so there are what? Income to the joint venture. So income, instead of income we have what? Taken joint venture account, or we have opened joint venture account, it should be credited. But here, as that amount or that assets are that surplus materials are taken over by co-venturer, so co-venturer account is what? Personal account. So co-venture account arise ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಬೇರೆಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸೇಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ bank account will be opened. If it is taken over by co-venturer, then co-venturer account will be arised. So as it is personal account, so we'll debit what? That co-venturer account as it is a receiver. So what will be the entry? Co-venturer account data to joint venture account. Next, in the same way, they may end up with some liabilities. Means they might owe some money to the business. So that liability should also be discharged as that joint venture is going to be closed. Joint venture close ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ, ಅಂದರೆ ಇದು ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಆಗೋ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೆಯುವಂಥ ಎಂಟ್ರೀಸ್. ಸೊ ಹಂಗಾಗಿ we have to what? Discharge that liabilities, or some co-venturer may what? Take over that liabilities. So when that, so for the entry, this entry is for what? When that liability is taken over by any co-venturer. So in this transaction, again two accounts will arise. Concerned liability account, again that liability is being taken over by co-venturer account, that's why co-venture account is arised. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ liability ಏನಾಗ್ತಿದೆ? As it is taken over by the co-venturer, liability to the joint venture is being what? Decreased. ಅಂದರೆ liability co-venturer ತಗೊಂಡೋಗೋದ್ರಿಂದ, so liability ಯಾರು ಪೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? co-venturer ಪೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, not the joint venture. Means it is separate entity concept ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ, even though is owner, will consider him as what? Separate individual person. So liability decrease ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, if liability is decreased, that should be debited. Means liability when it is taken over, so then it should be debited as it is decreased. Increase ಆದರೆ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ co-venture account ಇದೆ, it is personal account. ಬಟ್ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಅಕೌಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟಾ ಡೆಬಿಟಾ ಅಂತ ನೋಡೋದಾದರೆ, ಹಿ ಗಿವ್ಸ್ ಮನಿ ಆನ್ ಬಿಹಾಫ್ ಆಫ್ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್. ಅಂದರೆ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಆ್ಯಕ್ಚುಲಿ ದಟ್ ಮನಿ ಈಸ್ ಓವ್ಡ್ ಬೈ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್, ಬಟ್ ಹೂ ಈಸ್ ಪೇಯಿಂಗ್ ನಾವು? co-venturer is paying that liability. So that's why co-venturer is considered as giver, because on behalf of joint venture is giving money to that particular liability. So that's why he will be credited, and co-venture account will be credited. So concluded entry for this is what? Concerned liability account data to co-venturer account. It is what the entry. So if the same liability is paid, if no one takes over that liability, ಯಾವ co-venturer ತಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನು ಪೇ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಬರುತ್ತೆ? ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಅಗೇನ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಕ್ರೀಸ್ಡ್, ಇದನ್ನು ಡೆಬಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಪೇಯ್ಡ್ ಬೈ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್, ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕಲ್ಲಿ ಪೇ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಆ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿನ co-venturer ತಗೊಂಡೋದ್ರೆ ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಡೆಬಿಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಬಟ್ co-venturer ಈಸ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ ಗಿವರ್ ಇಯರ್. that's why it's credited. But when that liability is paid by joint venture itself, then same concern liability will be there, it will be debited, but joint bank account will be raised because that amount is paid by joint bank. Because any amount which is paid or received by the joint venture, it will be done through the joint bank account. That's why whenever joint venture pays amount or gives amount, so then it is through what? Joint bank account. That's why we will have the joint bank account in such transactions. Next, by the end of all these transactions, hereby all the transactions ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಆಯಿತು. ಅಂದರೆ ಆಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ವೆನ್ ಅಂದರೆ ದೀಸ್ ಎಂಟ್ರೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ಫಾರ್ ವಾಟ್? ಲಿಕ್ವಿಡೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್. Means by these entry that joint venture will be what? Liquidated. So ultimately they may end up with what? Profit or loss. So whenever we have what? Profit ಬಂದರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು? That profit cannot be retained with the joint venture. That profit should be transferred to where? Co-venturer account. So ಹಂಗಾಗಿ here two account will be arise, that is profit, and again is co-venturer account arise ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ? ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರಿಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟೆಡ್ ಆಫ್ ದಟ್ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಆರ್ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ವಿಲ್ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ವಾಟ್? ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್. ಬಟ್ ಈ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ನ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ರಿಟೈನ್ಡ್. ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ನ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? ವಿಲ್ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ? ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ರಿಟೈನ್ಡ್, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ? ಡೆಬಿಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಯಾರ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? ವಿಲ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಇಟ್ ಟು ವೇರ್? co-venturer account, because they are the owners. So as the capital is increased ಡ್ಯೂ ಟು ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್, ಅಂದರೆ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ನ ಅವನ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಏನಾಯಿತು? ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಯಿತು. ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆದರೆ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ವಾಟ್? ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ಡ್. ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆದರೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು? ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ದಟ್ಸ್ ವೈ ದ ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಈಸ್ ವಾಟ್? ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಎಟ್ ಟು co-venturer account. Whenever there is a profit by the end of recording all the transactions, means ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ನ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಿ we may what? End up with profit, then we have to write these entry. Next, for recording or when there is a loss and that loss is transferred to where? Co-venturer. Whatever may be, there may be loss or profit, that loss or profit should not be retained in joint venture, that should be immediately transferred to co-venture account. When the loss is transferred, instead of loss or loss ಬರ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಬರ್ಲಿ, instead of that will have what? ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ತಗೋತೀವಿ ನಾವು. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಸ್ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಲಾಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಡೆಬಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಬಟ್ ಲಾಸ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೋತಲ್ಲ, ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಬೀಂಗ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಟು co-venturer ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ದಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ವಾಟ್? ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟೆಡ್. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಯಾರ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಗೆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? co-venturer. ದಟ್ಸ್ ವೈ co-venturer ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅರೈಸ್ಡ್. ಸೊ co-venturer ಅಕೌಂಟ್ಗೆ ಲಾಸ್ನ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಈಸ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ವಾಟ್? ಡಿಕ್ರೀಸ್ಡ್. ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಡಿಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂದರೆ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಕ್ರೀಸ್ಡ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಹಂಗಾಗಿ ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ವಾಟ್? ಡೆಬಿಟೆಡ್. ಸೊ ಫಾರ್ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ಲಾಸ್, what is the entry? Co-venturer account data to joint venture account. So these are all what? The entries which we have to pass for the joint venture for ascertaining profit or loss. I hope that you have understood these all journal entries. So but only one thing I would like to clarify, that joint venture will prepare its final account at the time of end of ದಟ್ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್. ಅಂದರೆ ಬಿಲ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಬಿಲ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಷನ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಆದಮೇಲೆ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ವಾಟ್? ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಡೌನ್ ದೇರ್ ಜಾಯಿಂಟ್ ವೆಂಚರ್. ಬಟ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಫ್ ಕ್ಲೋಸಿಂಗ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ದೇ ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ ವಾಟ್? ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಆರ್ ಲಾಸ್. ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ದೇ ವಿಲ್ ಅಸರ್ಟೈನ್ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಆರ್ ಲಾಸಸ್. ಸೊ ಇಯರ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಪೆಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಅಪಾನ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್. ಇನ್ ದ ಡಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳುವಾಗಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸಮ್ ಟೈಮ್ if they agree what? We have to ascertain the profit or losses on a yearly basis, not on liquidation basis. ಅಂದರೆ ಅವಾಗ yearly basis we have to ascertain the profit or loss. But usual ಆಗಿ ಏನು ಹೇಳಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ will ascertain the profit or loss of this joint venture at the end of joint venture business. ಅಂದರೆ ಲಿಕ್ವಿಡೇಟ್ ಆದಾಗಲೇ ಕಂಡುಹಿಡಿಯೋದು. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ we have considered all these expenses and incomes. Thank you.